radio station, using our voice to rate your choice. Stay tuned.
Dear listeners, hope you've been well. We're excited to bring you another story for this week's Hills Book Club episode. It's a lovely tale from Nzanmongi Jasmine Patton's book of Lotha Folktales titled A Girl Swallowed by a Tree. In the foreword for the book, Istirin Kyrie writes, "This is a book that should be used like a pathfinder for other books on oral narratives. Literature from the Northeast has been suppressed too long by mainstream publishing that requires writers from the region to write within a prescribed box and format. Here is a writer daring to write oral literature her way, retaining the flavor of oral storytelling, including Lotha words that are culturally untranslatable in their original forms, unashamedly using the logic of the oral narrator and taking us back to an age when all animals and insects could talk, and streams could babble, and all creation had the gift of language." The story we're reading today is Arilao. It's a Lotha classic, a tale I've heard my grandmother narrate to me when she was alive, a tale my father knows by heart, as I recently learned when the name Arilao came up. I hope you enjoyed the story. Now reading the first story from Nzanmongi Jasmine Patton's book, A Girl Swallowed by a Tree. The story is titled Arilao. Far, far away, hidden in the hills of Nagaland, home to the azure bright blue sky, inhabited by innumerable varieties of fauna and surrounded by the aged mighty banyan trees, a little Lotha hamlet was tucked away. Small as it was, everybody knew everybody as a family would. On one corner of that small village, a quaint, ordinary thatched hut, built of a stretch of matted bamboos, was nestled. Lined up around the hut were scattered lush patches of greens and spring marigold blooms, which were a common sight in the hamlet. It is said that in the good old days, people never made any fences to demarcate their land against somebody else's. In fact, even doors were never shut because theft was a thing unheard of. So, this little hut was unfenced and as welcoming as any other home in the hamlet. An old widow named Nongkongre and her young son Arilao occupied this hut. The father had passed away a long time ago, leaving the mother and son to live by themselves within the four walls of this tiny hut. Nongkongru's will to survive beyond the husband was solely for her son Arilao, and she was blessed in turn because he was a very good son who made sure that the old mother was well taken care of. Arilao was also known for being the epitome of what every Lotha man should be. He was the most handsome man in the village, a prize catch. He was a tall, muscular lad, blessed with smooth skin that had not been ravaged by the hard toil of a man's life. He had short hair, cut just above his ear in what was known as the banti cut. His hair was so fine and straight that a lepok, in Lotha, which means machete, could shear it at one go. It glistened radiantly in the morning light, causing envy even among the women. To add to his physical attributes, Arilao excelled in everything known to men. He mastered all arts and activities: hunting, fishing, farming, singing, dancing, or carrying loads. He was the one to look out for. He was a God-kissed child. There was no manly feat where Arilao would lag behind. His fame spread near and wide, and parents from all the neighboring ally villages wanted him to become their son-in-law. All the young lasses in this village also vied for his attention, and they would cook the best of food and ayana, their lunch or supper, on a regular basis. He was certainly basking in all the adulation he was getting. Soon his unique beauty and unsurpassed valor became a huge bone of contention among the village young lads. Not one of them was able to enjoy the kind of attention and admiration that Arilao was getting from the young women. They tried to woo their beloveds with their best hunt and best gifts, only to be spurned because every girl in the village was lost in daydreams of the young Arilao. The other young men were fed up of trying and were very frustrated with the rejections. Then there came a time when the young man could no more play second fiddle and decided to take matters into their hands. Astounding as it seems, Arilao had unintentionally become an adversary to others and a deterrent to their plans of a family life. One fine morning, all the young men of the village had a secret meeting. They gathered deep in the forest where no living soul could hear them, and they hatched a plan. Something had to be done to Arilao, and soon they all chimed in. One suggested, "Should we throw him out of the village?" No, replied the others. That would win him more sympathy because he would find a way to come back, and that would be even worse for them. Another one said, Why don't we bribe him with grain and meat for the rest of his life? To that the others replied, He is a far better huntsman and worker than most of us, so that would not entice him for long. It is a defeated plan. Then some said, Why not tell him to marry? That way he will have to select only one or two. They thought that it was still not convincing enough because Arilao might not want to get married now. The young man also did not want to do anything which would affect their reputation and pride. After all, Lotha men luxuriated in their sense of manly pride. When they ran out of ideas for negotiation, someone among them suggested, Let's kill him and kill him in such a way that no eyes will be raised. Let's plan it well. We will have to cook up a believable mishap and take care of the Arilao menace once and for all. That is the only solution, because as long as he lives, he will be a distraction for the young girls and thus continue dousing water over our much fired up plans of wooing wives for ourselves. Everyone shouted in agreement as that would solve the Arilao impediment. Only one man among the 50-odd young men stood rooted, refusing to join in the evil shout. He tried to remind them that Arilao was also a friend to them all, but the group of young men were so stoked up and excited at the prospect of plucking out what seemed like a thorn in their path that none heeded that solitary voice of reason. That voice belonged to Arilao's best friend. They had spent all their boyhood days together, and for him to harm even one hair on beautiful Arilao was unthinkable. He was in a dilemma because on the one hand there was his allegiance and concern for his best friend, and on the other hand, if he did not take part in this plan, he would be an outcast in the village, for these were the men that the village would eventually rest on. He kept this unease and moral conflict to himself. Meanwhile, with the rest of the men, now that they were clear of their final plan, they set about working on a plausible alibi. First, they would take Arilao with them for fishing, and there they would beat and batter him to death with sticks and clubs with which they beat the ono. Ono here means fish poison made of tree roots. They could then go back acting all normal and ignorant of Arilao missing from the group, or better still, simply say that while Arilao was reaching out at the deepest end of the river to get more fish, he slipped on the mossy riverside rocks and met his death. Nobody could save him because the current was so strong. With that story in place, they went back to the village and went to Arilao's mother's small hut to invite him on an all-young man fishing adventure, after which they could have a grand feast for the entire village. Arilao was never one to say no to a good game, and so he immediately agreed. The next morning, he excitedly packed his lunch and set out of his mother's hut to meet the man of the village at the village meeting place. He called out to his mother loudly from the doorway, saying, Ayo, I'm going out for fishing with a young man of the village. I will get a good haul and we will feast like achievers. And he went off on his way, saying only that to his all-widowed mother. On their way to the river, as the young man sang folk songs and songs of bravery, Arilao noticed that his best friend was not joining in the merry revelry. Arilao thought that this was unlike him, so he asked, Why do you look so upset? Can it be that you are hiding something from me? To that, the friend responded, I am a little tired, that's all. But in fact, he had already started mourning Arilao's death. His friend had earlier tried to dissuade him from joining the fishing expedition, but Arilao saw no reason why he should not join them. What could the poor friend do? It was him against the rest of the men of the village, and so he could not reveal the terrible plan. The weather, unaware of the gloom that was to overshadow its magnificence, projected a clear sunny day, and so Arilao predicted a good catch. After laying out the ono on the thick tree trunk that they had lugged and placed across the river for their fishing, one of the young men suggested that they play a game about who would look best and who was the tallest amongst them by taking turns to lie on the trunk. Everyone came and laid down on the trunk, only to be told, No, you don't look good. Not fit at all. But when Arilao's turn came, everyone shouted, You look the best, and beyond the shadow of doubt, the tallest. Then they started with their singing. Unknown to Arilao, this was the cue for them to start attacking Arilao. Suddenly he felt bamboo sticks and wooden clubs raining on every inch of him. In the deadly vengeance of the man, Arilao's shouts for mercy were drowned out. The heartless, Young men kept trashing him till all traces of his physical body dematerialized. Arilao's friend had gone away and sat himself downstream as he could not bear to stand the sight, but as the river glided downwards as if by divine design, Arilao's nail reached the place where he was sitting. He quickly picked up the nail to keep as a memento of his dear friend. The young men of the village rejoiced, and in the same river which was strewn with oddments of their friend Arilao, they fished and took home a feast fit for a chief and enough to feed the entire village. As soon as they approached the village, they saw that all the old men and women were standing at the village meeting place waiting for their supper to arrive. Some of the first young men couldn't bring themselves to speak the agreed lie, so when old Nongkongre inquired about her son, they said, "Oh, we are sure Arilao is animatedly chatting with the others at the back." The rest of them entered the village with downcast and sad eyes and informed everyone that it was the most unfortunate day for their village. It was a day of mourning. "The waters have claimed the life of our dearest friend Arilao. We tried our best, but the current was so strong that we could not save him." Everyone started weeping for Arilao, but the mother Nongkongre stood still like a mute statue. She was in shock and she could not believe her son was no more. Her mother's instinct was steady and alert. It told her that something about his death was not right. She was not convinced that this was a mishap. After all, her son took to water like fish in the sea, and it was not even a rainy day, so how could an expert swimmer drown in the water? She called the best friend aside and gently coaxed him with her question. "Ango, Arilao and you grew up like brothers. You played together, slept together, even ate together from the same plate. He loved you, and I know you did too, so please tell me the truth. I am an old woman who has her feet stealthily crawling towards the grave, so let me die a peaceful woman. Tell me, dear Ango, what really did happen to my son?" To this, Arilao's friend could control no more, and he started sobbing inconsolably. "Ayo, I tried to tell the village young men, but they wouldn't listen. Arilao was killed because he was the best man in the village. He was the sole attention riveter of women's glances and affection. There is no man in the whole village that could stand as his equal. None of the men were confident of winning the love of a young woman as long as Arilao lived, and so to secure their futures, they killed him. I did not touch a hair on his head, but I could not save him. Forgive me." To this, the mother replied in a tearless and clear voice, "It's not your fault. Don't cry. Life has its own way of avenging wrongdoers. Justice will be delivered, do not worry." He reached into his pocket and took out that single nail that he had salvaged from Arilao's body and told the mother that it was the only thing he could preserve of Arilao. She unfolded the side of her serum and wrapped the nail there and cinched the cloth back into her waist. Life went on as usual, and the village forgot about the death of Arilao. At first, the villagers were wary of Atyo Nongkongre as they were guilty of her son's murder, and they did not want the truth to be out. With the weight of guilt on their shoulders, they were always on guard and avoided getting too close to Arilao's mother. As the years passed and she grew very old, she came to be seen as the grand old Atyo of the village. She seemed to have moved past the death of her son. She was the bearer of the truth of the entire village through her gentle and helpful ways. She was everyone's beloved Atyo. So with time, the villagers had no qualms about considering her a dear one and treated her as one of their mothers. Many years passed and the village continued to thrive in its agrarian lifestyle, growing as a resourceful village with a huge turnover of grain. Arilao's memory lay long forgotten. However, Nongkongru never buried the hatchet and kept Arilao's memory alive inside her. Every waking moment, she remembered the cruel death of her only son. She continued to live on her own in the old lonely hut and lived off the mercy of many a kind relative. Her hut had a desolate look. Plants no more adorned its front yard. She had nothing to live for, but she held on to a purpose to survive. The blood of my only son Arilao cannot be washed off so easily from the hands of the heartless man, she thought. The young men of the village had married and had families of their own. It was the season of harvest just before the onset of winter. It was a particularly good crop, and during this time as many hands as possible was needed to glean out the grain and crops. Children were not taken on these days because of the amount of work that went into gathering the crops. As they sat at the village meeting place wondering what to do about the caretaking of the children. "If we take the children to the field, they will run around everywhere distracting us from harvesting. But if we leave some grown-ups at home to take care of them, we will never be able to get the entire crop before winter, and it'll be a huge loss. So what should we do?" asked one of the elders. Arilao's mother came in at this point and volunteered to take care of the children because she had no field of her own and would only be resting in her hut. She also was rearing a big pig, which she offered to slaughter and cook for the children and leave for the villagers as well. "Leave the children to me. We will have a good time cooking and eating. Your old Atyo knows a lot of games too, so it'll be a very interesting day," she told the villagers. For ages, she had waited for a day like today. This was her opportunity to pay back in the same measure to the murderers of her son. The village people happily accepted that kind gesture and thanked her profusely. As was decided, the pig was slaughtered at the break of dawn by the menfolk and then left to Atyo for preparing the meal, and so they left for the fields. Unknown to the villagers, Nongkongru's long-baked plan was to be executed today. For many years, she had wept in secret. Since her husband had died only a few years into the marriage, Arilao was her lone purpose for living. She looked forward to life so that she could see her son grow. He was all she had. His death had eclipsed her world. She had promised to live only to avenge her innocent son's cruel death. Her days of waiting had paid off. She cooked and fed the children and then sent all of them inside the hut. The children complained that they wanted to play, but Atyo told them, "You are going to help me with some big tasks, but it will be like playing a game. Atyo will tell you what you need to do." That was enough to get the children enthused. The game was that they had to cover all the holes they saw in Atyo's weather-beaten hut. Atyo explained that this was to protect her from the approaching cold winter's chill of the hills. In those days, paper being a scarce thing, Atyo collected dried leaves and twigs, especially the big banana leaves, to plug the holes. She told the children to search for any hole in her small hut. The children set about helping Atyo. Wherever they saw a small opening, they would say, "Atyo, here is a hole." Atyo would again ask, "Can you see me from inside?" And the children would peal out, "Yes, we can see you." This went on till finally the children said, "No, we can't see you." Satisfied, the old woman locked her door with a single piece of wood and a rope made of long smoked leaves to ensure that the children could not get out. Then she went to the small fire, which she had already started in her courtyard. She took a big wooden torch and lit it in the fire. As it grew brighter, she took it to her hut and set it on fire. It was an abnormally windy day as Atyo Nongkongru set about her plan. This day was unlike the day her son died. Perhaps nature was mourning the killing of so many innocent children, but this wind inadvertently aided in spreading the fire faster than it would, becoming an accomplice to all Atyo Nongkongru's plan. The children cried and asked her to let them out, but to no avail. They cried and cried to their deaths. The villagers saw flames leaping up to the sky from the direction of the village and wondered what had happened. It was then that they noticed a solitary crow perched on a big tree singing. "Ka, ka, ka, ka. Nongkongru na oyamon nong hori shishashang. Ka, 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 ka. Nongkongru na oyamon nong hori shishashang." Translated, it meant, Nongkongru has killed all the village children. Traditionally, crows are considered bad omens. The crow's song was very melancholic, almost as if it was singing a dire of mourning. This song had a certain ominous pull to it, a warning for the villagers, so they hurried back to the village much earlier that day from their fields. By the time they reached, smoke and fire had enveloped the entire village. They called out for their children, but no one responded. They quickly took all the water filled up in their bamboo tubes and put out the fire, but it was too late. By then, their children were all dead. They were all charred and reduced to ashes or to dentures, except for one boy and one girl who were the only survivors. They had hidden themselves in a hole in the ground, believed to be a rat's burrow, escaping the leaping flames which burned down the house and all in it. The villagers turned hysterical seeing these two children, and because of the loss of all the other children, every one of them started laying claim to them, with each parent claiming and pulling the children towards them. The children were continuously pulled in all directions from their hands and from the feet and their heads, their bodies dismembered, and they died too. The whole village became one of the living dead as they mourned the loss of the last of their children. They finally remembered how unfair
You're listening to 90.8 Hills FM Radio.
This is 90.8 Hills FM radio station, using our voice to rate your choice. Stay tuned.